Uh, yes, on my computer. Okay, great. Yeah, welcome back. Welcome to track 4. Okay, not back. Yeah. So we have the 4 presenter, including myself. So my talk will be a very short one, but it is a bit behind the schedule. But I think we can catch up very easily. So no problem. So the first speaker is Professor Esther Maglis. So she is personally, she's one of my best colleagues, and she is really work hard all the time. I like that. She is assistant director in the School of Architecture at USC, and also the associate professor of practice, and she is a leading member of diversity inclusion committee. Okay, so please join me to welcome Professor Maglis.
Thank you. Okay, Juno, should I share my screen? Is that
yes.
the idea here?
Yes.
Super.
Let me double check. Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Okay, and please, whoever is in charge of timing, I have a little timer going, but just kick me when I go.
Sure.
If I go too far. All right. So hopefully I'll fit this in. So the project I want to talk about is a research project that I've been working on since August. I can't believe it's been going on so long. It's actually a large team, which I'll show you, and this is through the you'll see it in the next slide, but this is working with faculty from Dornsife, from spatial sciences, from environmental science, School of Architecture, as you can see, and the city of Los Angeles. This is a partnership project. And the whole project kind of started in an effort to expand our research and include diversity around our campuses, UPC and HSC, to be looking at sustainability and actually working directly with communities, kind of bringing the ivory tower out into the community. So the entity that has been coordinating this is called the Public Exchange. It's part of USC Dornsife, and they have been doing an amazing job. And
Hello, Esther.
also helping us with coordinating community.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, sorry.
Back now? Good. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Hopefully that'll be the only time. Just let me know. I can hear you. Large research team. Professor John Wilson from Spatial Sciences, Will Barrelson from Environmental Science, an assistant researcher in Spatial Sciences, and 4 undergraduate students who have been doing all of the legwork that you're going to see here when it comes to big data and data collection, and then working with university relations, reaching out into the community where they have well-established networks and connections there, which has been so important. Kate Weber, Maria Baboni from Public Exchange, and then from the city of Los Angeles, Rachel Malrich, the new chief urban forester for the city of LA, and Melinda Geyer, who has also been working on these things for the city. So project context, we're looking at the neighborhoods. It's a 5 square mile area, including Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, El Sereno, and adjacent neighborhoods, all surrounding the USC HSC campus. And the question here really is about what role urban forestry can play to benefit communities of need. And the first piece of science, and this is evidence-based, data-based, often as landscape architects, we go out and we say, well, we want to plant trees everywhere. The equity issue here is, where should we be focusing on this, and how are we going to really adapt to these new and expanded extreme heat days? So extreme heat meaning over 95 degrees a day. And if you look at the El Sereno, what you're seeing is we're going to go from what we have currently, which is about 20 days of extreme heat. By 2060, I think we're looking at over a month, 40 days, 40 to 50 days. I mean, it's really a huge expansion, and we need to start thinking about that now. As you can see, not every place in the basin is going to experience the level or the quantity. Everything's going to multiply, but some areas will still have less hot days than others. Some areas in the valley already have hot days, and they're just going to see more of that. So we actually kind of started this project out. One of the things that I did was I happened to be very fortunate in September 15th of 2020, I took my laser thermometer out there and I started measuring the temperature on the asphalt and the streets, on the sidewalks, on the grass and under the shade of trees. And I found extreme surface temperature differences. For instance, in Lincoln Park, a high of 140 degrees on the asphalt and a low temperature of 88 degrees under the shade of a single tree. That was really similar all over, with 30 to 40 degrees of difference between paved surfaces and shaded surfaces. So that was a good piece of information and has served us well throughout the study. One of the questions is, what kind of tree? What are the trees that are going to provide effective shading? How can we be more strategic? And this is what the city is actually in the process of creating an urban forestry management plan. And part of that is updating their tree species, approved species for street trees. And as you can see on this slide, there are vast differences in the shade quality having to do with what we can measure. And the measurement that we use is leaf area density. And there are well-documented research methods for quantifying that. But what there isn't really a standard that says for the trees that might be on the list from the city of LA, which ones do we know have the greatest leaf area density, which will be the best potential for providing this necessary shade. Then there's a whole host of other complications really about other things that make these trees appropriate or not, potential damage to sidewalks and other paving, resistance to disease and pests, and just maintenance requirements. So a lot of things there. So this is what we really have been trying to do, is look at the urban forest around USC's HSC campus, determine where, how many, and what types of new trees can be added for the most effectiveness in communities that really need this. And then there's an air quality side to this. And Professor Will Barrelson, as you'll see, actually has been developing air quality monitors. And this was new, interesting, and different. We actually climbed up into trees and put these sensors in the canopy of the trees to measure the PM 2.5 and carbon content. So here's our study area, as you can see, around the health sciences campus. It's kind of interesting. We have some very large areas of open space, which in my opinion tend to skew some of the tree counts. This we did because this is a community and equity process. We looked at the data to better understand our neighborhoods, and we met with community members, I think 3 times over the course of this project, to understand their understanding of trees, and really importantly, what their response to extreme heat is going to be. What are they thinking? How are they planning for it? Within their resources? And we use all kinds of data, including this tree research that's available to everybody, estimating tree canopy existing in the area now. As you can see, it's lower than average. And we identified these research gaps of which trees, how many, where, and what will the outcomes be. An important thing to be thinking about is with more trees need water. This actually this is something we need to follow up on, and we haven't gone forward with this, but thinking about where are the natural water flows, where are the soils likely to be most moist from underground streams and ephemeral streams and historic hydrology. So those will be the places where trees will need the least supplemental water. So I told you the students did a lot of work here. These 4 students inventoried 38,000 trees, one by one, counting them from aerial photography and other data. Now, the other hard part was they tried to identify all of them. The city of LA has been working on a tree inventory, and so some of the data was inventoried, but they've been adding trees, thousands of them. And when they couldn't figure out which tree it was, if it wasn't one of the low-hanging fruit easy ones, then they called me and they asked me, what are these trees? And we did this during COVID using Google Street View. Actually, the Street View, the time view, was very helpful to look at these trees at different seasons if they'd been here long enough to see their flowering characteristics, any other kind of differences that were seasonal. We got almost all of them. The land use, just to summarize, there are parks, there are schools, there's a lot of multifamily, higher density housing here. There's very low permeability outside of these large green areas, which are the Health Sciences Campus, Hazard Park, Ascot Hills Park, and undeveloped portions. Everything that is urban has extremely low permeability. And this was very important as we were looking at street trees, is where were the streets with wide parkways, or which are the, the narrow streets and the wide streets. And the wider streets tend to have wider parkways, which you'll see why that's important. We also looked at schools and parks as potential tree planting locations in the study area. And then the students and the spatial sciences folks actually crunched all this data, the demographic data, and some of the physical data to better identify where are the most urgent needs, where is the tree canopy lowest, or also where do you have the most vulnerable populations? Over 65, low income, dense, with a high percentage of walking or bus commute, meaning households that don't own cars. That is where we figure people actually need good shade for their commuting, for their household errands. And it also corresponds, I think, with income. A lot of these neighborhoods, also the houses, there's not a lot of air conditioning visible. And I'll show you that. But so we developed these 5 greening scenarios to try to gain some understanding of what's there and what improvements we could make and how those might be made. So we started on a street. This is a street called Axtell Street in El Sereno, which we consider, this is low-hanging fruit. These are 6-foot wide parkways already on these streets. The challenge here for the city, and as they understand it, is they need to find money to actually remove concrete and plant trees. So we're looking at this one. In this one, there are a few trees actually on the street. It's mostly an issue of planting in existing parkways. We're looking at doubling the existing shade canopy and lowering surface temperatures. And you can see there's also a lot of space on private property that could have increased tree canopy here. All right, not so easy. This is the hard one. This is a street called Barbie Street. It's actually not very far from North Broadway and from Lincoln Park. This is a narrow street with a 3-foot wide parkway. If you look at the little trees over on the bottom right, that is what you are allowed to plant in there by the city standard now. There is one existing street tree in this 2-block stretch. There's a lot of on-street parking. So the rule we set was, we will propose, and there's a utility on one side, we will plant small trees. Some people actually would really like to have citrus trees and other small trees or flowering trees. Go ahead, plant them in the narrow parkway. But in order to really achieve significant shade, we need space for large trees. We need 100 square feet of root area. And so the proposal that we developed was to actually take space in the street right-of-way and to create large volume root areas for large shade trees. But this is new, different, and innovative, and nothing the city has tried before. And then once you do that, if you think about things like the slow street programs that we've got, this is a 2-block stretch. You could close it off when it's 95, 115 degrees, when the paving on other streets is 145, and the temperature inside the houses is 115. Have a block party in the 88-degree cool shaded street. This is a cooling resource, and it is a health resource because there are health impacts from extreme heat. So we also looked at parks. This is, we looked at Hazard Park, which is adjacent to the HSC campus. And I'll tell you the issue here, the rules here were, we didn't take anything out that was already there. All the programming stays. The trees in this park, there have been trees, they're in varying states of health. Some are great, some are terrible. And the issue here was maybe not so much as, the other partners in the study are really focused on how many trees, numbers. My focus here is effectiveness, efficiency. How much cooling can we provide? How can we take all kinds of existing unshaded open space and really maximize the shade there as a neighborhood cooling potential? And this is where the air quality comes in. How do we pick the appropriate species that will actually absorb PM 2.5, maybe PM 10, other carbon and other pollutants? And what we know is some species are much better than others at actually accumulating the pollution. And this is what Will Barrelson has been studying. So we started our study over at Ramona Gardens, which is in our study area. Will created, he's been working with these air quality sensors, we identified the tree, a bunch of trees. He put the sensors up in the trees to measure between a control point and what was happening in the trees. And he got some interesting results back. We also decided, partly from convenience, partly because for other reasons, we should do a similar study on the UPC campus. So we did this over here by Expo and Truesdale. You can see the sensor actually in the tree on the left side. And here is what the results look like. And when the red dots, which is the tree, are lower than the control, which is the blue, that means you've got lower levels of PM 2.5 in the tree than in the surrounding air around it. So we did this for each of these species, and we could conclude consistent with the general. There's not a lot. This is the problem. There's not a lot of literature in Mediterranean arid climates. But I saw consistently in the research that pines and coniferous species are the best accumulators of PM2 and other air pollution. And part of the reason for that is they're sappy. And interestingly enough, when the wind blows, their leaves don't flatten and go parallel to the wind. Their leaves or needles stay kind of perpendicular and capture and accumulate the PM 2.5. So good news is we're almost finished with our final report. We presented this to President Folt on Monday, Tuesday. It's been a long week. There will be a barrage of public announcements as part of the USC Earth Week celebration presentation. So, and we're contemplating a next phase to get into more of the meat of the data. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. This is very excellent presentation. So yeah, for the audience, we will have at the end of these sessions, we have about 15 minutes of Q&A discussion. So if you have any questions for the presenter, just leave your question in the chat, or at the end, you can ask the presenter directly. Okay. Great. So let me move on. So next presenter is Lauren Dentbridge. So she is adjunct assistant professor. And yes, so please share your screen if you're ready.
Thank you.
By the way, she's one of my best colleagues also.
Thanks. Okay, can you guys see everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
So, hi everybody. My name is Lauren. I'm presenting an idea that sort of generated at the middle of last year based on all of the social justice movements that were happening, and really trying to think about how me as a lighting designer and my colleague Nick Albert, we were just sort of thinking like, how can we start to address some of these structural racism issues within the lighting community? And with the help of two of my students, Avery and Monica, we have started thinking about light as something that has privilege. So the kind of light that we're specifically talking about in the research that we just recently started is focused on the exterior because it has the most wide reach of the kinds of light that we're talking about. And if you think about exterior lighting and you want to talk about what actually is touching the most amount of community, it really is street lighting. And in street lighting, we can find signifiers of beauty. We can find time and effort. We can find infrastructural support. We can find pride of ownership. And it can be transformative. You can take a place that really doesn't have much going on and make it something so much more spectacular that has a coziness to it, a familiarity to it. And then you can take something that isn't inherently special, but improve upon it and make it make it more easily usable, et cetera. And if we combine light with this sort of term that of white privilege, and we think about all of these ways in which a certain group of people has access and benefits because of systemic racism or because of inherent things that are built into their demographic, and we combine that with light, then you can really start to see how street lighting is actually being used to racialize spaces. And it's linking a lack of illumination with blackness or darkness. And it's creating spaces in which, you know, whiteness can be invested in and also spaces where racism can take place and not just racism violence. And I'd also like to point out that for the purposes of this talk, we're not specifically looking at just Caucasian or white demographics or African American demographics, particularly in the current time we have right now, looking at the increased violence towards our Asian brothers and sisters. So if you take the idea of street lighting that could be made to make something beautiful, and then you look at through the lens of privilege and those who don't have it, then your exterior lighting could be incredibly isolating. It can be indicative of a lack of investment. It can be indicative of oppression and a sort of surveillance over not just your neighborhood and not just your family, but also your whole group of people, you as a human being, and not just in terms of impacting your own state of mind, but also your physical health. And before proceeding, there's some actual language in terms of light and dark that has a physical meaning for what we can measure and what we can't. But I would be remiss to not mention that even in saying those words, we need to apply a Western thought lens to it, that darkness often is associated with corruption or dirtiness or lack of importance. And then light is being lifted up into, progress and modernity, et cetera, innocence. And so I am not speaking in those terms, but it is important that we understand the application of these factually placed, visible, giving streetlights with that in mind. And so the way that we're starting to think about lighting as a privilege is that it is a signifier of status. So in Extending the White Way, which is a paper that I found while starting to try and figure out how street lighting has been applied to certain areas and not others, there was a beginning in the late 19th century, late 19th century, excuse me. And then the beginning of when electricity really became something that is making an impact on society and how it became a hallmark of progress, and really using the Chicago World's Fair as the beginning of lighting as this entity that is showing the height of technology. And so on the left, you see Tesla's big installation of his alternating current at the World's Fair, which at that time was the largest installation of electricity in the US. And then side by side with this are essentially human zoos showing both, Africans or African Americans from the South and Filipinos on display. And so while it's not meant to be, here's an engine and here's an engine working in a quiet back room powering this endeavor, it's actually meant to be a physical exhibition for people to be able to see. And these are side by side. And status also being a location of your neighborhood and how you are getting light. So this is from an area in Texas where these small colonias are essentially fighting for the right for light. So they have been excluded municipally from the integration of street lighting into their neighborhoods. And so they are essentially unseen by the government that is overseeing their jurisdiction, excuse me. If we move from status of importance and the ability to be seen, both in terms of physically and recognition, we can look at quality of life and how if you are segregated into a neighborhood of a certain race or a certain demographic, you can be held in place also by the lack of street lighting. So if your neighborhood is not allowed to progress, meaning it is not allowed to receive this street lighting, so it cannot allow illumination for evening travel, for visibility, then you are essentially stuck in place in terms of being able to move and navigate nighttime activity. So here is a study from North Carolina where Black neighborhoods, which are shaded, and white neighborhoods, which are in a lighter shade of white, you can see street lighting requests. And some of the areas have one, and some of them have multiple. And when we started this process, we really thought going into it that we were going to find, like the Colonias, that neighborhoods of color were going to be underlit. There wasn't either the infrastructural support, there wasn't perhaps the tax dollars, there wasn't the interest, et cetera. And what we realized is that it's actually a little bit of both. Neighborhoods of color are both underlit and extremely overlit as well. And there's more talk about that a little bit later. And what's interesting is that if your quality of life varies, then the context in which your life is taking place varies as well. So you can take the same 30-foot tall standard pole, which you see really clearly on the right here in downtown, that's 30 feet tall with a really long mast arm that's putting out a ton of light indiscriminately in a lot of different directions. And if you take that from there and you put it into the middle of another area, the context around it changes. And so the meaning of that fixture in that space changes. If you're not only relying on this one light, then its importance dwindles down in the whole context of the space. It would be almost too obvious to not talk about light at night as a means of safety. And again, kind of like darkness and light as being more than just physical measurable items. Safety is also a loaded term. What makes a neighborhood safe and how safety measures are applied is unequal. And so I was looking through different ways that street lighting had been used, and I came across the changeover from stop and frisk in New York to omnipresence. And Bill de Blasio, in this article from Vice, said specifically to light up the areas that have been previously obscure and problematic, and to make it easier for the NYPD to do its job. Now, the areas where omnipresence is used is basically project housing, where there's multifamily development units that are tall, that have a lot of families living in them. And instead of having stop and frisk, they essentially set up these large poles that are blasting light in all directions. Now, what's interesting is that when you use these kinds of big floodlights to light up tons of spaces, it inherently changes how you act in the space. So it goes from being light of safety for the residents to being light for safety of people who are coming into that space, and really becomes light that's used for control. And I can tie that back to, in the 1800s, specifically also in New York, where there were ordinances that Simone Brown in her book, Dark Matters, calls lantern laws, where if you were a Black or partially Black person or an indigenous slave, you were required to carry light at night so that you could be seen. And then that gives permission to others, specifically whites, to give you permission to continue about your business in the evening or to censure you. And you can extrapolate that all the way through to how not just the NYPD, but also how police use light in almost a weaponized fashion. If you look at this picture on the right, the outside of the cell is incredibly brightly lit, so it's hard to see the officer's face, but the light coming in allows the prisoner to be seen. The gentleman here who is using his flashlight to shine into the other gentleman's face. And if you take it even further, you can look at how your behavior changes, not just from white light or this top-down sort of light that's literally pushing down on you, but also how color light or hue can trigger a sense of fear or anticipation, and pull it all the way to the psychological stress of surveillance. So now when you see a green light, you immediately know that someone is watching you and paying attention to you. And these particular bright floodlights are not just impacting these communities and these residents' mental health in terms of being seen in surveillance. They're actually physically changing their bodies. When you're exposed to that amount of light that often, it can have health consequences. So if you disrupt your sleep-wake cycle, meaning you don't go to sleep at the right time and you don't wake up at the same time, you can have very real effects. So the day-night cycle, what I'm talking about is circadian lighting. So lighting that follows the path and color temperature of the sun, what we have been evolutionarily tied to. And so if as you move in to the morning, the color of your light is going to be much cooler. And then that ties into a lot of hormonal and physical changes that your eye receives through your photoreceptors. And then as you move into the later part of the afternoon and the evening, that color temperature will warm up, which then triggers another set of hormonal changes in your body, preparing you for rest and slumber. So if you are exposed to a greater number of the cooler lights or a greater amount of the cooler light in the hours when your body is preparing to go to rest, it has a harder time making that transition. Now, this is a newer field of study for lighting, and we're already starting to see a lot of lighting manufacturers and designers implement a lot of these changes. But there's a correlation between being in a neighborhood that is being inundated with an extreme amount of ambient light pollution even. Then you have the psychological stressors of being surveilled, and then you have the physical effects of, or the mental effects, excuse me, of not being seen as an individual. There is a very real correlation to how all of these effects can be greaterly recognized in your community. And that can happen either because you live next to one of these floodlight poles that's blasting light into your house and you can't get rid of it. One of the residents said that they felt like they were in a strip mall on the moon because the light was so intense coming into their house. And it could be from shift work. So when we look at the quality that we're trying to achieve for people, it's really somewhere in the middle. It can't be underlit and we can't overlight. And so the right quality of light that we're trying to hit is one that is really contextual. And so what we're trying to move to now is really looking at taking all of the different kinds of studies I've referenced and looking at Los Angeles. So we're looking at, in summary, different demographics, income, race, redlining effects to how people have been pushed into certain areas. And then looking at the density of streetlights in these areas, just to give you an idea of how many of the 220,000 streetlights there are just in LA City, filtering it through the code recommendations or requirements through these organizations, and then really seizing the moment because LA is preparing for the 2028 Olympics and is already starting to make infrastructural changes to support that. And to shout out our colleague Sandra Yum and Project Room for designing the new streetlight that will be, I assume at some point, installed in the city. They're in the prototyping phase right now. My hope is that they start to really think about the quality of light that's coming out of these fixtures, because the pretty object and the thing that it is already a success. And now we just need to look at how it's supporting the neighborhoods and how the light that's coming out is living up to the actual light fixture that it's coming out of. So thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you very much. It's quite on time. Yeah, very excellent presentation. Okay, so let's move on. Next presenter, yeah, Professor Eric Haas. So he's an adjunct professor in the School of Architecture. Yes, yeah. Eric, yeah, please share your screen if you're ready.
Right, I am. Thanks, Junho, who is, by the way, one of my favorite colleagues. So,
definitely you.
So thanks to Junho and Scott and Faiza for inviting me for this presentation. My talk is called Places of Promise, and I'm just going to present a couple projects, kind of award-winning projects that our office has done over the last 10 years with addressing what our position about this relation to the symposium is that we're really focusing on design, and design as something that contributes to wellness, not so much of bodily health, but the wellness of communities. And these projects are both dealing with nonprofit organizations that are working with young children, both infants and toddlers, primarily through early Head Start projects. And those nonprofits are committed to serving these kind of emerging stakeholders that are a little bit often not considered in some of the communities that we're dealing with. They're a little bit invisible at times. And we feel as a firm that it's incredibly important for these young minds to have direct encounters with what we call spaces of promise or places of promise, so that it builds a kind of affirmative and hopeful, but not patronizing relationship to places that are beautiful, that they may not have as much other opportunities to have direct reference to. That these places are typically embedded within the communities in which these folks live, which typically requires, again, given the kind of economies that we're talking about with the nonprofit world, adaptive reuse projects that requires a great deal of creativity and thoughtfulness, both dealing with what we think of as the kind of aspirational goals of what we are trying to get to, beauty, connectivity, and a kind of social presence of these facilities, but also eminently practical concerns, what Emile Zola called the dirty jobs of architecture, and trying to how to get these things actually constructed. So we'll proceed with that. The first project is for an organization called Para los Niños, who's been working in Los Angeles for around 40 years or so. They first started working in the kind of east of Hollywood neighborhood, exemplified by the little blue spot, a place on 6th Street. Some people know Alameda is here, 6th Street here. And they've been in this location serving these kind of under considered communities that are actually nearby for this link. This is their first kind of headquarters in 1983, shortly after they began work there. And their original kind of presence on this block was when the area was still fairly kind of being used as light industrial facilities and so forth. And they were able to kind of get in this location, again, in a kind of fairly economical place for a nonprofit to work in the moment. We were brought in as a firm about 10 years ago, to kind of give them a kind of refresh to some of their facilities, which you can see in the kind of before pictures here. Were serviceable, definitely kind of doing their job in terms of serving the communities and the kids that they were handling as well, but kind of jumped over what we considered the ability of these facilities to kind of give more than just function to their clientele. The street view down below, they had facilities by this time in the entire block. So our first project for them was what was called the Family Center on the east end of the block, and which was basically a kind of little renovation of a bowstring truss facility. This is a kind of diagram that we had at the time about thinking about the kind of broadcasting of a beacon to the community out of this relatively small 2,500 square foot facility. Our work was really restricted to this area, if you can follow my cursor, of the existing facility. One of the major kind of concerns of a place like this is not only the relationship to the relatively rough streets outside, but also to internal sort of family relations that might have provoked some disagreement. So one of the major concerns was about kind of access control moving through this space. So there's a kind of almost like an airlock at the beginning of this sequence into this facility to allow kind of very restricted control over who gains access to the interior. So just, the goal, of course, was to kind of make a space of protection and nurturing and privacy where families could come and feel secure in their dealings with the kind of therapeutic consultants and counselors. So this is a kind of diptych we set up just to kind of set up the distinction between the kind of space on the street, which sadly has gotten even more heartbreaking over the years since these photographs have been taken. We're right down the street from Gladys Park. Some of you will know that as a kind of very tough area to be near today, and creating a kind of space. There's a completely different world inside this facility. So as a kind of space of therapy, it was important for this place to be kind of restful and calming. So it was almost a kind of clinical kind of color palette, very, very soothing in terms of its kind of color palette. And again, trying to bring to the architecture, this is an interior therapy room. Most of these buildings that we're dealing with do not have very much in the way of windows. It's almost entirely skylit as a facility. So this is an interior space, and you see a kind of light strip at the top, which is not a light, which is actually kind of interior skylight, bringing borrowed light from a larger space inside into these therapy rooms. And then here's that larger space inside, again, the bowstrings truss structure, and kind of you can sort of now looking back at the street and seeing the kind of progress through the kind of entry sequence and into this large, you know, kind of home at the end of that sequence. The next building over we did was a renovation of the pre-existing preschool and turned into an early Head Start center for toddlers. Again, one large space. You saw some of the before images in the first couple of slides that I gave. Very indistinct, except for a series of large skylights. Again, no actual windows to get natural light into the space. And we always felt that, you know, the research is growing about the specific benefits of things like light and view and acoustics and so forth on not just kids in higher levels of education, but even very, very small children. So the project was about inserting these kind of three freestanding walls and in this larger space to serve both the kind of isolation or independence of each individual classroom, but also encourage connectivity among the various caregivers that work together in this space. So a kind of exterior and interior view that is, yes, Michelle Obama coming to visit the space. This facility became a kind of noteworthy facility for this organization. And we got her to come and read to the kids. A view down the side where you can see the existing skylights. There's a kind of large plane that we inserted here to bounce that light a little bit further into the space. And then down one side, these kind of shaped walls stop and allow basically a space for the caregivers to kind of lean over into each other's space when they need to kind of chat or kind of check in on somebody or observe what's going on. So the individual independence and somewhat some acoustic privacy is maintained between the individual classrooms while contributing to the overall connectivity of the facility. And this is a larger kind of, again, view of the overall space with these three walls that are have a kind of abstracted crenellation to the top of them, hopefully encouraging the kids to be able to look at shape and form with renewed imaginations. And the last bit of our work for Parlos Unidos on this site was a kind of large signage element to allow a renewed sign of commitment to the neighborhood that this organization had at this point been there for 35 years. So we were kind of riffing on the primary colors of the organization and figuring out ways we could kind of get past primary colors. So this is actually a kind of multi-layer perforated metal against a painted backdrop. So you can see it kind of actually being built on the right-hand side where these primary colors are through the vision of the perforations working against each other, producing at least some blended colors. And then a kind of final goodbye slide of the facility relative to downtown. So they, you know, really kind of broadcasting their continued commitment to this area through this these super graphic signs. The second project is what we call the Vine Street Early Head Start project. This is on Vine Street in Hollywood. East Hollywood was built as part of the Promise Zone from the Obama administration and their grant program for Los Angeles. You can see, again, this is the Hollywood we like to note is not part of the kind of major boulevards or major streets. Yes, it's Vine Street, but there's a whole other Hollywood that lives just off Vine Street, which is very dense, very residential, and fairly lower income areas. So this facility likewise was kind of trying to acknowledge the kind of change from the old Hollywood. This was originally the Ryder Sound Studios. That's a guy named Loren Ryder, who was one of the kind of most famous sound engineers in Hollywood history. was his original studios. But of course, that work has all kind of moved off, or most of that work has moved out of this area of Hollywood and into others, and has been replaced by a very different community. So part of what our goal was to try to link that new community to a little bit of the history of Hollywood, not in a kind of direct way, but in a way that kind of honors the understanding of what some of these buildings were like. The building was kind of tarted up on the outside, but left in fairly disrepair on the inside. So it too was a very large bowstring truss structure. We had a kind of idea of thinking about it as two landscapes. One, the landscape below for children and caregivers, and a landscape above dealing with maintaining the integrity of the bowstring truss while inserting a whole series of mechanical systems, lighting systems, and most importantly, acoustic baffles and blades to allow there to be a kind of, again, this kind of goal about linking all of the areas in classrooms, not subdividing it into small rooms, but acknowledging the need for independence, autonomy, and acoustic comfort. So we had a kind of what we called the mise en place drawing about all the things we needed to put in the shell. If anybody has done any work for things involving small children, you will know there is a lot of plumbing involved. So a lot of toilets, a lot of lavatories necessary to pass both not really building code, but state licensing requirements for things with these small children. So like a ton of the budget was spent on just plumbing, as well as structural upgrades for this. It's an unreinforced masonry building. I get a little bit crazy to put kids there, but we went through with kind of reinforced the system, not only with additional shear walls, which you've seen in the images, but as well kind of layers of protection around the perimeter, isolating the masonry from any future problems. This is a kind of floor plan. We had an idea about creating essentially an internal street with this kind of relatively dense site, and the organization of these rooms, basically a large facilities. These are again driven by state licensing requirements, large facilities for infants, then toddler classrooms here and here and here and here, as well as some administrative places on the other side. This, of course, drove the building officials crazy because they wanted to still maintain this as a corridor, not as a hallway, but we got past that. And then the result inside, so we see both these shear walls as well as the kind of space inside. This is the waiting area. There's a lot of course, focus on cleanliness in any facility dealing with young children. So everything is very, very scrubbable. But we made a point to kind of bring a budget splurge of vertical grain Douglas fir all the way around in this kind of banding, so that there was a place that you could touch things in places that were related to the kind of overhead space of the building. Entry sequence, before and after photographs. The one at the bottom is the existing decrepit building that was actually behind the space, which was then transformed into infant playground behind the building. That's our neighbor to the left-hand side. That playground, and this is the toddler playground to the both. Again, shoehorned into this site, taking advantage of these things. Again, required space for the licensing requirements. And just one last note, this facility did become a kind of place for the community. That was always the intent. That's always our secondary goal, about kind of opening up the interiors of these facilities so they can serve as not just individual classrooms, but really as a community center. The goal, of course, is to provide wraparound services to the parents of young children, not just kind of daycare. So it becomes a place for, nutrition, consulting, community centers, and places for people to hang out, in places others when their kids are not there. And then a couple last shots of the interior of this space, with kids having a good time, understanding their space on their own, but also being in a place of hopefully great and effective beauty. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Very great presentation. Thank you. Okay, so next presenter is Juno Choi. Yeah, this is me. So, I'll have a bit some short one. Let me share my screen. Okay, so actually, yeah, this is not much about my project, but I want to talk about some ideas of what to do and how to do to prepare for our future. So in the area of the architecture and also building science. So the title, as you see, the era of AI starts. So are you ready? So so let me turn on. Oh, just a second. So let me. Okay, so let me turn on. I think you can hear some sound. Yeah, so this is very beautiful music, right? So actually it is composed by AI. So actually previously we had a kind of myth that AI cannot do anything creative, but these days they do. So that make me a little bit scared actually. Oh, sorry. And this is also the paint, but done by AI. So actually you see, yeah, there are a lot of kind of some feelings, something we might be a bit familiar or not much. Okay, so depending on our some past some paint experience. So yeah, it is also they are start doing working on a kind of a creative work. Okay. So in our life, so AI is everywhere these days. Okay, so you may receive a phone call from credit company. Hey, your card might be in a risk, or some maybe somebody tried to use it illegally. It's kind of warning, some spy security team. So at least you might experience it at least more than one time. And stock market, yeah, Wall Street, yeah, many stockbroker, they start losing their position because AI, their analysis skill is much better. Their interest, the profit rate is much higher. So their position is really threatened by the AI. And also we have in our email system, spam email filter, yeah, definitely based on AI. Sales information, especially target advertisement. One of my colleagues he's working on a small company, startup company, but he's working on some target advertisement. So that is a completely different theme as compared to conventional advertisement. In Kayak or Expedia, so they frequently recommend some ideas or some program option to you based on your interest or historical data. So these days everywhere, even they predict how their love, affection will be sustained or how soon they will divorce, something like that. So machine learning even predict individual people's life, their pattern. So it is really scary. So yeah, robots are taking, as I said, some human job on the Wall Street. That has been reported recently. Just one thing. So artificial intelligence software market. So their investment, the revenue increasing rate. You see, we are here about 2020, 21. And within 5 years, yes, it will be increased by almost 4 times, right? Almost 4 or 3.5 times. So average on each year, we have a 30% or 40% increase in the market. Okay, let's see architecture. Almost flat. So we are here 21. After 5 to just compare it. We are here 25. We are here 25. The increasing rate of the market size increasing rate is about 3% or less. Okay. So the one funny thing is that actually I frequently go to some wearable computing conference. It isn't completely not my domain, but I go. So I should go. I must go every year, except the COVID season. So this one is a kind of amazing project. So
science fiction, like in The Matrix. In that movie, Keanu Reeves learns new skills from a computer passively. That's kind of what we're talking about here. But instead of plugging into a computer, Thad wants you to wear these gloves. Meet Thad's colleague, Caitlin.
People say Thad is quirky, but I never really picked up on that, so I guess I must be quirky too.
They started with piano.
The first thing we tried was conveying a simple melody on the piano using a wearable computing device in the form of a glove.
Yeah, so the principle is that they provide electrode signal to the hand, your muscle will train, and then once move your hand on the piano, your hand can play automatically. Okay, so actually I have seen this one as a prototype model when I attended the body computing conference a few years ago. And at the time, another team, not her team, but another team, they brought some like a magic glove. It is a very similar principle, but even though you have no idea how to play guitar, you can play guitar with some glove because they generate a lot of electric signal. Amazing. That is AI. So, yeah, so think about our domain. So as you know, I'm from the building science. Okay, this is a thermostat. Maybe some house may still use it. Yeah, my house still have a very similar one. And then even though we developed some thermostat, kind of smart or kind of programmable, but in some cases it is just locked and refuse any access of a user. So that's why you see on the image, this is a white one is a ice. So people cannot operate the signal, operate the thermostat. So that's why they intentionally put the ice so that they can turn on the AC more effectively. Yeah, it's very funny, right? So actually, this is a conventional some research parameters to estimate your thermal comfort. So very conventional clothing insulation activity, air temperature, humidity, mean radiant, and air velocity. So in our domain to predict your thermal comfort, how much you cold, how much you are warm. But the thing is that in reality, there are many hidden factors. So the conventional guideline says that, hey, 75, 77, or 70 Fahrenheit should be fine for everybody, but it's not true. So previously we used to have a mannequin. So actually right one, this lady's name is Jessica. So she is not just a plastic mannequin, it has some blood vessel inside and their skin temperature is slightly warm. She has a heartbeat or something like that. So it is a very good toy, experimental toy that we are frequently used in building science domain to study thermal comfort. So let me share this one.
Oh, hey, hi, Stacey. How's it going?
Really? It's 83 degrees outside.
Right.
And look at me.
I know,
Yeah.
but it's been just so crazy slammed.
Todd, you've got to do something about this office. You could bake a chicken in there.
Right. I'm gonna take care of it for you, okay?
Good man.
You bet.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah. So that kind of situation always happens because we have individually we have different preferences in terms of thermal comfort in our domain, but some other people are not much happy while the others are happy. So that is very common. So these days, yeah, we have Nest. It is kind of some AI-based thermostat, but that is a good try actually. So these days, everything is smart, right? Smart watch, smart car, even smart beer, smart cab, it is smart beer. So it includes some special chip. No, it's just a sticker to indicate the right temperature to be drunk by his owner. Okay, so yeah, so these days we are doing a lot of smart city thing, smart building, smart system, smart environment control. So the thing is that we help about a lot of advanced technology. So we started wearing a lot of some wearable sensors. So could be wearable on your face or wrist or some chest or some arm side or leg side. There are many options available. So and the other hand, so 82% of people in the US say, hey, I'm willing to wear whatever. So as far as it's good for me. So as compared to some thermostatic control, so with the help of AI, I developed with the support of NSF, support the skin temperature driven environmental control. So it means that without asking you to operate your thermostat or app, it just estimates your thermal comfort based on your wearable sensor, so on a skin. So this is interface, and also facial skin temperature I incorporate. And the thing is that for the lighting, so we have a standard guideline. Hey, the large in an office, it should be the lux wise, it should be 400, 500. Some living room, maybe 200, aisle area, 200 or less, something like that, very strict. But it's not true because depending on people, we need a different light level visual for their personal visual acuity or any background, some preference, cultural background, cultural preferences. So we try to accommodate some eye pupil sizes to estimate thermal visual sensations. So to estimate some his or user's bright visual comfort. So yeah, so we use a lot of some formula and collect the eye pupil sizes to integrate. And then we did a lot of human subject experiment, which means a lot of data. So we actually develop eye pupil size driven environmental control, which is for lighting conditions. So yeah, right column, the bottom right. So it is just a concept, but this one is a prototype. And we while we are collecting data, we estimate the user's visual preferences, and then we mimic his or her preferred lighting level using AI. So this one over here, I intentionally turn off the light over here, and then it'll be, sorry. Yes, yeah, turn off, and it is supposed to be brighter. So because this one is 100% controlled based on the human eyes. So actually I turn on maximum, and it should be reduced to adjust. So that is a one prototype model to meet individual need. So yeah, so on the other hand, machine learning and then neural network or AI algorithm. So our group try to develop using based on the digital twin technology, which is originally from computer science. We try to use AI-based building facade design. Okay, we know that it is really, really early stage work, so we still have a lot of things to figure out. But it is some way very possible to be implemented in the future, I believe. So one of the concerns that I have is that, okay, so in 1900, so in Fifth Avenue, New York City, it is just a wagon. Wagon become a taxi at the time, but 13 years later, 100% mobile vehicle. So I assume that I have never been there at the time, but I assume that coachmen at the time, they may protest a lot because it is a complete revolution to them, right? So, and good thing is that my concern is that the architecture program not much ready. So not the only USC, but in other school architecture program, they might have some limited some preparedness. So for the future. So good thing is that AI and for example, they start recently publishing some article through their magazine. And even Arab, they already started adopt some AI algorithm for their facade, for daylight control, using the genetic algorithm, which is one of the machine learning. So yeah, so I think that's it. So I think for our research, creative work, and teaching any type of pedagogical activity, I think we should do something to prepare the flood of AI, some technologies. Otherwise, we might be controlled or governed by AI. So that is my, just a current idea. That's it. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we have, we have a few minutes left. Actually, the room will be exploded. So any questions? Let me stop my sharing. Yes. Any question for any presenters from audience?
You know, this is Michael Resac. Lauren, I have a question for you. I remember when I moved here, you'd come in for a landing at LAX, and if you look down, there were distinct areas of different colored streetlights. You know, mercury vapor, high pressure sodium, and I don't know what the rest were. But and so one time I was sitting next to a cop, and I asked him, what's is this a way to just demarcate different cities, or did one city have a vendor that had like high pressure sodium, et cetera? And he says, no. You know, that by the color, you could tell, I forget the term he used, but basically how potentially dangerous that area is. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is illuminated redlining that only comes out at night. And so is that still a policy? Because it's awful.
Actually new. That's new to me. I haven't heard it explicitly stated like that. I've seen the differences in color temperature vary from neighborhood to neighborhood or municipality based on essentially like governmental funding, right? Like we have the money now to transition over to LEDs. So we will, when that first happened, we saw this huge influx of a lot cooler color temperatures, and now they're working their way back down to warmer colors because of environmental justice and dark sky and things like that. But I have not explicitly heard that essentially identifying neighborhoods by color temperature. So thank you for saying that. I will look at that.
Sure.
Okay. Great. So any other questions? So Esther, actually, I have a question. So very quick. So how did you formalize how did you format your research team? So I think the project is very wide scope and also very good depth. So how did you construct your team for such as interdisciplinary?
Yeah, the other thing you need to know is it's a very relatively low budget project. So basic, really what's happening here is it's eager faculty who want to do something, who are willing to go above and beyond as the seed to start something bigger. So it's really all based on mutual respect and enthusiasm is the best way I can describe that.
So I know that you applied for NSF fund proposal. So did you hear anything from them?
I think that's another one you're thinking about with CAC and Rob McConnell. This one didn't. No, we haven't done that, but yeah.
Okay.